recall what we've covered so far, because that's going to help us. So, so far we've looked at arguments, right? We've looked at, in the first two chapters, we looked at arguments and we tried to explain what validity is, what invalidity is, what inference is, and etc., etc., all those things. So in the fourth chapter, which was, I think, fallacies, right? It was the fourth one. So we looked at the linguistic aspect of these arguments. So we talked about what the relationship between the premises and the conclusion in linguistically. So we talked about किस तरह की premises आपको किस तरह की conclusion पे गलत तरीके से लेके जा सकती हैं. So that was linguistically. But now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the same relationship between the premises and the conclusion in a theoretical way. So we'll be using the theory of deduction. Okay, so before I get to tell you what the theory of deduction is, let's just recall quickly what a deductive argument is. So a deductive argument is one whose premises are claimed to provide conclusive grounds. That is the key word, right? The conclusive grounds for the truth of its conclusion. So that's what differentiates it from inductive arguments. So for those of you who've forgotten what inductive arguments are or what deductive are, just try to go back to the book and try to recall and remember, and I'm sure it'll come back, right? So the next part of the chapter number, I think it was chapter number 1, right, was that there are two kinds of deductive arguments. One can be said to be valid and the other is invalid. So we were concerned with the valid form of deductive arguments. And we said that validity comes about through inference. So when the claim is correct, in other words, that there is inference, then a deductive argument can be said to be correct, right? And we also made this important note that if it is valid, it is impossible for the premises of an argument to be true without the conclusion also being true. So if you have true premises in a deductive argument, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false. Okay. So now let's just get back to the theory of deduction. So what are we going to be doing with this theory? Okay, so the theory of deduction aims to explain the relations of premises and conclusion in valid arguments. So we're going to be concerned with valid arguments. Obviously, all valid arguments are deductive arguments, and the relations between the premises and the conclusion. We've already done this, but now we're going to be looking at it in a theoretical way. And this is another important point, the second point. It also provides techniques to discriminate between valid and invalid deductions. So by that, what it means is that we'll be able to tell which of the arguments are valid and which of them are invalid by applying and using theory. So that is what is going to make this very interesting. So there are two theories up till now, at least this is what the book says. So we have the classical or Aristotelian logic, which was developed by Aristotle over 2000 years ago, and it was the main theory of deduction up till the 20th century when symbolic logic uh, came about. Okay, so symbolic logic is also the modern form of logic which is being used nowadays, but it is still based on the Aristotelian one because that was what logic was all about for over 2000 years. So what is classical logic or the Aristotelian logic? It deals with arguments based on the relations of classes of objects to one another. Okay, so we have two sets, two classes, two categories. One could be anything and the other could be anything. You could think of this in terms of sets. Okay, so you have sets or classes or categories. And a collection of what is a class or what is a set? It's a collection of all objects that have some specified characteristic in common. So if I say that we have a set of all black things, so you put all those black things in that set, right? That set includes all those things. If I said that there is a set of mammals, so all the mammals in the world would be in that set. Okay, I'm sure you've done this in maths also. So what is this theory about? So just to recall, we're looking at theory of deduction, and the first theory that we're looking at is the classical one or the Aristotelian one, and we're trying to figure out what that is. Okay, so we already discussed that it is about sets or classes. Now let's just see what the relations between these sets is. Okay, so all of one class may be included in all of another class. That's very simple. We've done this before. So we say that all dogs are mammals. When we say that, so that means um, all the dogs in the world are mammals. So we have one class of dogs and the other class of mammals, and we're saying that one class is wholly included in the other one. There's another way to put this also, which is point number 2. We say that some, but not all, of the members of one class may be included in another class. So if we say that there's a class of athletes, and then there's also a class of females. So if we say that not all athletes, there are some athletes who are females, so that would be applying this point to that. Okay. And then there's obviously the third, which is the only option left. We say that the two classes may have no members in common. In mathematics, I think we say that it is mutually exclusive, right? So the class of all triangles and the class of all circles may be said to exclude one another. There are no triangles, there are circles, right? So these are the three ways of describing these relations between the classes or the sets. So these three relations may be applied to classes or categories of every sort. In other words, deductive arguments present propositions that state the relations between one category and some other category. So basically it's about two categories, and it's about the relations between those categories in these three ways: that it could be wholly included, it could be wholly excluded, some of it could be part of the other, some of it could not be part of the other, and the both of them could have nothing in common and be mutually exclusive. So this is what the theory is in a nutshell about. So we call it categorical propositions. Okay, so let me just give you the definition of what a categorical proposition is. A proposition that can be analyzed as being about classes or categories, same thing, classes, categories, affirming or denying that one class S is included in some other class P in whole or in part. Okay, so let me just try to explain this more a little. So we looked at arguments in which there were the arguments so far in this course that we've looked at, जिसमें आपके पास दो premises थी और एक conclusion थी. So वो जो premises आपने अभी तक जो देखी हैं, उन सारी premises के अंदर वो इसी के ऊपर base कर रही थी. We always had two sets, two categories, और एक set जो था वो दूसरे के अंदर शामिल हो रहा था या उसमें से निकल रहा था. ठीक है, सो अभी हम उसी के मुतालिक बात कर रहे हैं. सो वी डीलिंग विद द सेम काइंड ऑफ प्रॉब्लम हियर, राइट? For example, if we say that no athletes are vegetarians, that would be your first premise. And then we say all football players are athletes, second premise. Therefore, no football players are vegetarians. See? So what's happening here? Can you just think about it for a second in terms of what we've discussed so far? And I'll just go to the next slide. Like, can you think about कि इसमें propositions जो हैं, premises जो कि हैं, यानी उनमें क्या हो रहा है? ठीक है? So first of all, let's just try to explain what's happening here. So we have an argument, a so-called argument. We don't know if it's valid, invalid. It seems to be deductive, yes. So we have three categorical propositions. Why are they categorical propositions? They're categorical propositions because they're dealing with two classes, two categories, all three propositions. Athletes, vegetarians first, football players, athletes second, football players and vegetarians third. So it is categorical in that sense if you're looking at it in terms of Aristotle's theory or the classical logic theory, right? So that's right. It does contain three categorical propositions. Second, each of the premises is categorical. That is, each premise affirms or denies that some class S is included in some other class P in whole or in part. So S or P say, don't be intimidated by these terms, but what it means is S basically is subject term and P is predicate term. So subject term, I'll talk more about this in the next class, but just let's like go with it right now. So subject would be athletes in the first premise, and predicate would be vegetarians. So we're saying कि सारे there are कोई ऐसे athletes नहीं है जो कि vegetarians हैं. सही है, इसी तरह ही बाकियों में हो रहा है. So it's about inclusion and exclusion. And obviously the third point is 3 classes in the example. Okay, so we have 3 propositions and 3 classes, or 3 categories, or 3 sets, whichever way you want to understand this, which is athletes, vegetarians, and football players. Okay, so I hope this made sense to you. If it didn't, you can write to me and I will explain it to you, obviously. But if you can wait a little, I will talk about this more in the next class, when I will describe the kinds of categorical propositions and explore the relations between them. Okay? Okay, take care, guys. See you.